Hello everyone, and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 77, and it is March the 19th, 2017, Friday. So happy Friday to you all. Well, you know, the last couple days I've been trying to find out anything I can on what's going on with the investigation into the surveillance of Trump and people around him, and of course judges, presidential candidates, and just about anybody else you can think of, apparently, during the Obama years. And I specifically focused, though, on the surveillance and the unmasking and the dissemination of that information throughout the intelligence agencies, which is the big crime. And that's why I'm so focused on that specifically. But the last couple days, I've been checking the websites for both the House and Senate committees that are doing the so-called investigations. And they have no dates set for anyone. You know, they talk about having many people that they have invited to come and testify. We've been hearing that Susan Rice is trying to cut an immunity deal. So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but there doesn't seem to be any dates set on their websites or on their web pages for either of those committees. So, and it also appears that they're having difficulty getting the information that they've requested, which I imagine they need to see some of this information to know how they're going to proceed with their questioning. So apparently there's a lot of feet dragging, even though Trump's president. He's got his guy at the CIA now. He's got his own attorney general, although Sessions recused himself, which he shouldn't have done. And so now you've got a former Obama appointee is now actually, unfortunately, the guy that's running the show there, so he's probably assisting in dragging his feet. So there's a lot of feet dragging, there's a lot of blocking, stonewalling, and various things going on to try to keep these hearings from moving forward. And it doesn't seem like anybody on either of the committees have the stomach for a real investigation the way I would like to see it happen. And as I've been saying for a very long time, I doubt that either the House or the Senate are going to get to the bottom of this. I don't think they really want to. I think that if we're going to find the perpetrators of these crimes, which I'm absolutely certain did happen, I'm certain that Trump and people in his campaign were surveilled with political intent to bring down his candidacy and his presidency. I'm convinced that the people in the Obama administration, Jarrett, Rice, Rhodes, Comey, Clapper, Brennan, all a part of it, all in cahoots, working together to take down the president-elect, and then the president. And as I've said, I don't know that they'll get to the bottom of it. I think the only way we will get to the bottom of it is if we have some whistleblowers who will actually come out. Hopefully they'll come out and testify in front of Congress in some open hearings. But at this point, most of the sourcing that we get from a lot of the reports that we've been talking about here now for 2 months are unnamed sources within the Department of Justice, the FBI. So there's still a lot of fear within the agencies of coming out and talking because, again, I mean, it's part of the deep state. And I guess it's pretty risky for someone within those organizations to come out and go public and tell the truth. So I imagine there's a lot of fear. You know, your career could be ruined and things, even worse things, could happen to you. So I do believe that this is the problem, but I do believe that we're going to need some sort of not that we haven't had whistleblowers, not that we don't have sources coming out, but someone who will come out and appear in front of a committee and hold up their hand under oath and make a sworn statement or do something that can go on the record. Everything is off the record. And so I believe leakers or whistleblowers are the way we're going to have to go unless Trump proceeds to civil court, in which case he could go to civil court and sue BuzzFeed and try to find out who leaked the dossier to BuzzFeed. But to find out about the surveillance, the unmasking, the dissemination, all these sorts of things, you're going to have to get former Obama administration officials under oath, and you're going to have to get some documentation. And I just don't think that there's a lot of stomach for that amongst the either House of Congress because they're all part of the establishment and the deep state. So this is the frustration with trying to get to the bottom of anything that involves the establishment or the swamp, because they're all involved in it. I mean, they don't tell on each other. You know, a lot of people think, well, it's the Republicans now, they're in control, but it doesn't matter. The Republicans and Democrats are all part of the same establishment, all part of the same deep state apparatus, and they look out for themselves. They look out for number one. And there's nothing to be gained by any of these people to come out and expose the criminal activity of the deep state, and we can see what the deep state can do when you get on the wrong side of them, by the way Trump's being treated right now, and a lot of these members of Congress, or even as Chuck Schumer said himself, you get on the wrong side of the deep state, and they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. Kind of takes us back to Dealey Plaza, November 22nd, 1963. They certainly found a way to get back at JFK, and then of course they stopped his brother when it looked like he was going to win the nomination, and of course it's alleged that they also were behind the murders of Malcolm X, also Martin Luther King. So yeah, you get on the wrong side of the deep state. These are some nasty people. The swamp monsters are some very, very nasty people, and that's who Trump is battling. So we don't have a whole lot going on today on TowerGate as far as what's going on with their surveillance. I continue to watch it every day, and like I said, there will be periods, days and weeks, maybe months that will go by that there just won't be very much going on, but we'll continue to follow other things that are important as well, that are somehow related to the overall investigation, because keep in mind there's really 3 investigations that are kind of all mixed into one, which I've never been a fan of. The general Russian meddling into the elections, Trump-Russia collusion, and of course the wiretapping of Trump, the surveillance of Trump and his team, and all this sort of thing. So these things are all kind of mixed together, and it kind of muddies up the water. It makes it kind of hard to focus. And so when you have these committees and they call people in, I mean, they're getting asked questions by one person about this, then another person asks about something else, and it really makes it hard to focus on anything. And that's why I believed that we've always needed, you know, a special prosecutor. Now, they've had no problem coming up with a special prosecutor to take a look at Trump-Russia collusion, but they never thought a special prosecutor was important when Hillary had a private unencrypted server where she stored thousands of classified information, emails, including 22 top secret SAP programs. None of that warranted a special prosecutor. It didn't warrant a special prosecutor when Loretta Lynch basically said that she wasn't going to prosecute Hillary. It didn't get a special prosecutor for the IRS targeting conservative groups. We didn't get a independent prosecutor appointed when Eric Holder was running his gun running operation, which resulted in the death of a border agent, and at least one, and no telling how many more people have been killed as a result of arming the drug cartels with weapons. So, you know, it's just kind of funny. And listening to the news, I mean, there's really 2 different takes going on this right now. Is that number one is you have these people out here going, oh, this is fantastic. Now you got Robert Mueller, and this is good because it takes it out of the Congress. It's not political, and he can do an investigation, and he can and he can bring this thing to a close, and Trump can be cleared of having been a part of any collusion with Russia or anything else. And then you have other people saying, yeah, well, you know, it's not a good idea anytime that you're under some sort of investigation, but I guess it's better than having the Congress do it where it's very political. So my take on it is, no, it is true that it's not good to have a special prosecutor looking into anything, especially if the special prosecutor is part of the establishment, which brings me to Robert Mueller. Now, one of my favorite subscribers, Maura, asked me about Mueller, and yeah, I remember Mueller quite well. You know, Robert Mueller is kind of what I would consider an establishment Republican. He is kind of a moderate establishment Republican. He's a San Francisco guy, but he is a Republican, which is pretty rare to find a Republican in San Francisco. But he is a Republican. He's most of his life, other than when he was working in Washington, is spent in San Francisco working for a big law firm. That particular law firm, by the way, has represented both Ivanka Trump. I don't know if he personally, but members of that same law firm that he works for have represented Paul Manafort and Ivanka Trump in legal cases. But he is a kind of a establishment, quasi-establishment, moderate Republican. I consider him part of the establishment, probably part of the swamp. But he is a straight shooter. He's kind of a quiet dude. He's definitely was not someone like James Comey, because Mueller was the FBI director. In fact, he actually was made the FBI director just a couple weeks before 9/11, and which has always raises suspicions. And he served throughout the entire both terms of Bush, and then he served the first 2 years under Obama, and then he went back to California, back to working for that law firm out there. He was a Marine Corps veteran. He was wounded in Vietnam, received a Purple Heart, and he's generally known as kind of a quiet, kind of secretive guy, kind of a straight shooter. You could do a lot worse, I think, than Robert Mueller. You could do a lot worse if you're having an independent prosecutor, but I just don't believe that that the independent prosecutor should have ever been appointed in this Trump collusion issue, because in my mind, there's no probable cause or reasonable suspicion to appoint a special prosecutor. There's no hard evidence. It's just a bunch of media-created hype. But if Mr. Mueller does want to get to the bottom of it, the very first thing he has to do is establish the initial fact, which is where all this Trump-Russia collusion and Russia being involved in the elections, where all this started. It started with the hacking or leaking at the DNC. And so if Mr. Mueller wants to actually do this investigation properly, he first needs to validate whether or not the initial narrative is even true, that the Russians hacked into the DNC. As you know, I believe that is a hoax. I don't believe that happened at all. I believe that Seth Rich, the DNC staffer, was the one who leaked the information to WikiLeaks, both directly and through a third party. And I don't believe the Russians hacked the DNC servers at all. I believe it was Seth Rich was the leaker. Now, if Mr. Mueller wants to really look into this, the very first thing he needs to do is he needs to pull the file on Seth Rich. He needs to go interview people at the DNC where Seth Rich worked. He had about 20 to 21, 22 co-workers there, which I'm sure could provide him a lot of information. His laptop is in the possession of either the FBI or the Washington, D.C. Metro Police. He needs to go through that. He also needs to get a subpoena, and he needs to take a look at the servers at the DNC, and he needs to find out what's on those hard drives at the DNC, because the FBI never actually looked at the hard drives there. They asked multiple times on multiple levels, according to James Comey, and they were denied. Instead, the Democratic National Committee hired CrowdStrike, a private company very closely associated with Google executives, very closely associated with Hillary Clinton, the Clinton campaign, and liberal Democrats in general, part of the swamp. And of course, they're acting as the employee of the DNC. In other words, the DNC hires them to come in and analyze their servers. So the DNC was the client of CrowdStrike. Now, what are we supposed to think that the CrowdStrike is going to conclude? They're working for the DNC. So are we supposed to believe that the CrowdStrike is going to do the investigation on their servers and then come out and say something that would be exactly the opposite of what the DNC wanted? What the DNC wanted was for them to say it was the Russians. What the DNC did not want them to say was that, yeah, we think it wasn't a hack at all. We think that we've seen some intrusions into the system, but they appear to be from the inside, and it appears that they may have been Seth Rich. They didn't want that information to come out because that didn't fit the narrative, and that's probably why they didn't want the FBI looking at their servers. That's why they used CrowdStrike. It would be like if you hired an attorney to represent you, and you paid this attorney to represent you, and then the attorney came back with information that was damning to you, and then made that public. So that's how ridiculous it is. Now, of course, CrowdStrike, as most of us know, in the past several months, has now come out and questioned even their own initial findings that it was the Russians. We also learned from WikiLeaks Vault 7 that the CIA often hacks into computer systems and leaves the fingerprints of some other entity at the scene of the crime. And so either of these things could be possible. But if Mr. Mueller wants to really take this investigation seriously, he must first verify the accusation that the Russians were involved in hacking the DNC, which is where all this started. So Mr. Mueller needs to get to the bottom of that. If Mr. Mueller decides that he's going to start his investigation with the assumption that the Russians hacked the servers at the DNC and this was part of the collusion, then he isn't. Then we'll know it's a fix. That the fix is in. We'll know that he's not serious about getting to the bottom of it. Because if I was appointed to be the prosecutor, the very first thing I would do is establish the facts of the initial narrative, which is the Russians hacked the DNC servers, leaked it to WikiLeaks in an effort to put all this information out to do harm to the Hillary Clinton campaign and work in inclusion with Trump or other people in the Trump campaign team. This is the general narrative. So if I'm the FBI, or if I'm the special prosecutor, the very first thing I have to do is make absolutely sure that the narrative that I'm going to be working from is correct and that it is based in fact. And at this point, we haven't been shown any intelligence from the FBI, from the NSA, from the CIA. We haven't seen anything. The only thing we have is CrowdStrike, a private firm not associated with the government in any way, working for the DNC being their client. They're the ones who've come out and made that statement. So in my mind, if Mr. Mueller is serious about this investigation and is going to do it in a professional manner, the way I would do it, the very first thing I would do is establish the facts in the case. If he starts off working from a narrative based on half-truths and false narratives and things like that, we'll know that this is really pretty much all to do about nothing. And it's a little disappointing that the Republicans caved. So many Republicans caved on this particular deal and went along with the idea for this special prosecutor, even if they think he's a wonderful man. He may be a straight shooter, may be all that. But the fact of the matter is, it feeds into this larger narrative that Trump is, not fit to be president, and this is part of the overall campaign. And I was very unhappy to hear Mitch McConnell, Richard Burr, Marco Rubio, and other Republicans, of course John McCain, Lindsey Graham, but other Republicans. So I would urge each of you out there to pay very, very close attention to your senator and your representative, your senators and your representative, especially if they are Republicans. Watch them very closely, because if your Republican congressmen or Republican senators are caving, are getting weak in the knees and have no backbone and will not stand up for the president who is of their own party, and who will cave to the Democrats and go along with this kind of nonsense, you should hold them accountable in the next election. Keep up with what your congressmen and senators are doing. Watch them very closely. And in 2018 and 2020, or the next time they come up for re-election, you certainly should hold them accountable if you don't like the things that they're doing. Do not continue to vote for neocons, members of the swamp, and that's about 98% of the Congress. So watch your members of Congress and your senators very closely, because 98% of them are playing for the other team. They're doing everything they can to do harm to Trump. Most of them didn't support him from the beginning. They're part of the establishment. They're part of the swamp. Trump cannot drain the swamp in Congress. Only we can drain the swamp in the Congress. Okay. Also, there's another item that I'll touch on, and that is the Democrats. There are some Democrats and members of the liberal media, shouldn't surprise us, who now are trying to make the argument that Trump should not be able to appoint the new FBI director because he's now under investigation. This is a bunch of BS, and I'm sure Trump will ignore that. I'm sure he is going to appoint an FBI director, and I hope he appoints a good one who is not part of the swamp. This is the problem. So many people that Donald Trump, he's talking about draining the swamp, and I believe he wants to do that, but he also is being told that he has to have people around him that understand how things work in Washington. So he gets people like Priebus and others around him, and they tell him, hey, yeah, this is a guy you should look at, this is a guy, this is a guy, these guys all know the system, these guys know the players, these guys know how to get things done, these guys have cred. And so Trump ends up surrounding himself with a bunch of people who don't like him, who are working for the other guys, and he doesn't even realize it, but he's surrounding himself with people who are trying to cut his throat. I'm going to talk about at least two of those people here in just a moment. So the Democrats want to try to make the case that Trump should not be able to appoint his FBI director. He should go ahead and do that tomorrow if he's ready to do it, and ignore this. He has every right to appoint the FBI director, regardless of what investigation is happening or not. Doesn't matter. I heard one name pop up that I hope to God it's not true. I heard the name floated today of Joseph Lieberman. Oh my God, a lifelong liberal Democrat and a man who holds both Israeli citizenship and U.S. citizenship. It is my opinion, by the way, that no one should be able to serve in the U.S. government who holds dual citizenship. There are several countries where you can hold American and foreign countries' citizenship, and I believe if you take an oath to serve in the United States government, you should have to relinquish your citizenship in any other country. So Joseph Lieberman has both is a citizen of Israel and of the United States. He has always been not just a liberal Democrat, but always been primarily a operative for the hardliner Likud type Israeli. I don't really know what I guess you could call them a party, but it's more of an ideology, kind of like that we have the neocons here. It's like the neocons and the Likudniks in Israel are essentially one and the same. And Joseph Lieberman, former Democratic senator, is a lifelong Likudnik and neocon. He is a Democrat, but he is a neocon. And the last thing in the world that Trump needs is to surround himself with another neocon. It's the neocons that are creating a lot of the problems he has now. They are not his friends, and I can assure you that Joseph Lieberman is no friend to Donald Trump and will not serve him well as FBI director. He will always act in the best interest of Israel. And I have no problem with people from Israel citizens acting in the best interest of that country. The problem is, if you're the FBI director of the United States of America, you should not be acting in the best interest of Israel. You should be acting in the best interest of the United States. Sometimes our interests are aligned, but sometimes they are not. So I would think that hopefully, when I heard that name floated today, I almost fell out of my chair. The idea you would appoint Joseph Lieberman is just, that's a head scratcher, and I certainly hope that was just Trump throwing the Israelis a bone, or Netanyahu a bone, or something like that, just to have his name mentioned as being considered. Hopefully they're not serious about that. That's probably coming straight from Jared Kushner. So that's my thoughts on that. Now, another thing that I'll touch on, and again, one of my favorite subscribers, Mara, sent a little comment on my last video about McMaster and Dina Powell, and thank you so much, Mara, for doing that, because I did want to touch on this a little bit. I wasn't going to, because it's not so much related to TowerGate, but it's related to the overall story that we're following. And I have to tell you that when I heard those two names of H.R. McMaster and Dina Powell being brought into the administration, I mean, I was extremely unhappy to hear that. H.R. McMaster is a hardcore neocon. He is a longtime close ally and friend of John McCain. I mean, John McCain and McMaster are very, very close, have had a long relationship for many years. They're both essentially salesmen for the military-industrial complex. They're pro-war all the way. They're total neocons. McMaster is just horrible and very, very unhappy. Again, it was supposed to be Flynn in that position, and Flynn's 180 degrees the opposite of McMaster. But they managed to get rid of Flynn, and we got McMaster, and I'm sure that someone told Trump that that would be a good guy. He needs to get McMaster out of there as soon as possible, immediately. I believe that McMaster, as Maura suggests, is one of the people leaking. This most recent leak, supposedly about Trump giving the name of a city regarding some terrorists to the Russians, to Lavrov when he was in town last week, could only have come from probably McMaster. There was only about 6 people in the room, and McMaster was one of them. I mean, there's not too many people who could have been responsible for that leak. Now, McMaster, working in collusion with his good friend Dina Powell, who has kind of followed along like a shadow behind McMaster for quite some time, I believe McMaster actually gives the stuff to Dina Powell, and she goes and does the leaking. And so again, thanks again, Mara, for bringing up Dina Powell. Certainly, I believe her and McMaster are part of the leakers, and if it were me and I were Trump's chief of staff instead of Reince Priebus, and I should be his chief of staff instead of Reince Priebus, he would be surrounded by much better people, and I would be protecting the president. Believe me, I wouldn't be setting him up with all these neocons and throat cutters and backstabbers that are killing him. So let's talk a little bit about Dina Powell. Of course, as I said, she's a neocon of the hardest line. She's Egyptian-born. She is a very close friend of Huma Abedin and attends a lot of social functions and belongs to a couple of different groups that Huma Abedin belongs to, pro-Arab groups, pro-neocon groups. She's also a member of a group called Vital Voices. Vital Voices was founded by Hillary Rodham Clinton. And one of the top people over there at Vital Voices, and a very close associate and friend of Dina Powell, is none other than Valerie Jarrett. Yes, Valerie Jarrett, Barack Obama's right-hand woman, who I call the traffic cop, who I believe was the one who was directing a lot of the surveillance and a lot of the unmasking, a lot of the dissemination, because she would have been, Rice was the actual doer, but Valerie Jarrett was the person directing those to do these things. So they're connected at the hip like Siamese twins, and Dina Powell is right in that mix of Hillary Clinton, Huma Abedin, Valerie Jarrett, the swamp, the establishment, the neocons, Powell, McMaster, McCain, the swamp. That's where she comes from, and that's where Trump should send McMaster and Dina Powell back to the swamp, preferably floating on top of the water belly up. Nothing a little M80 couldn't solve. That's how we used to do it. You ever throw an M80 into like a creek or something like that? Well, if the creek that you throw the M80 in has a lot of fish in it, like the ones we used to do, like big carp and things like that, they come up to the surface and they float like on their back until they eventually die. We were kind of mean kids, I guess, but we had fun with them M80s. They blow up mailboxes pretty well too, and they do a pretty good, effective job in your high school toilets. But then again, that cost me 10 days of suspension, and Mom had to fork over some cash. So we won't talk about that. But anyway, yes, McMaster's and Dina Powell, Maura, you are absolutely correct. I believe it's very, very likely that they are leakers, and they are out to stab the president in the back, slit his throat, and take him down. They are part of the swamp. And that is how I want to finish the video today. Something very, very important. I want to leave you with one final thought here. What we have going on right now is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it. Basically, it boils down to this. For the first time since our founding fathers stood up to the British and took on that establishment, for the first time, we actually got a citizen president. Donald Trump took on the fight, and he, along with all of us who supported him, we beat the establishment. We beat him at the ballot box. For the first time ever, we beat him at the ballot box. And they're unhappy that they lost at the ballot box. So now they're going to try to overturn the election using every tool in the box. And that's what we are really witnessing here. So pay very close attention, because this is unprecedented, it is historic, and better take this seriously. They are trying to take down President Trump. There's no doubt about it. The entire establishment, the whole swamp. So we just have to stay focused and hope to God that we can withstand this, and hopefully Trump can actually get the swamp drained in time to put good people in there, expose the criminals, drain the swamp, and maybe we can survive this thing. But right now, it is ugly, and it's dead serious, and that's what's happening right now. They are trying to overturn the election because they lost at the ballot box. Time to get focused and pay attention. So anyway, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. I appreciate y'all, and I'll be back tomorrow, or Saturday, I should say. I'll be back Saturday, and we'll see what drops next. Y'all take care. Bye.